All right, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you haven't taken a minute, please enter your name and contact information into the chat. If you notice that when you joined on that the recording button came on, we are recording this session for educational and quality improvement purposes. So by joining this session, you're giving permission to be recorded. We do put our recordings on our website as well as our Canvas page so that anybody could go back and review those. ECHO is an interactive community, so we're really hoping that we can reach out and communicate with each other and support each other during these sessions. Please, participants, you are... Oh, sorry, I forgot to turn on my transcript. It should be on right now. Participants are expected to be engaged in asking those questions before and during. So please feel free to put questions in chat, ask them as we're going through it. And then if anybody is ever interested in presenting a case narrative, that is a great way to learn new ideas from your colleagues, from other people. So if you are interested in doing a case narrative, please reach out to us about doing that. And then once again, also, as we're doing this, we are talking about sometimes sensitive subjects. So please remember to avoid using any identifiable information, names, where they work, just de-identify those situations. The key components of an ECHO is really that community of practice. So understanding who else is working in the field with us. We will have a didactic speaker, a case presentation, and then a breakout session where we talk about what recommendations for that case. If you can take a minute to rename your profile, we've all been on enough Zooms that we all know probably how to do that, but you can go to the 3 buttons at the top by your picture, or you can change it on by clicking the participant icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. It just helps us know who is on the call, who we could reach out to. Maybe somebody puts a interesting comment and you want to make sure you know who that is coming from. Raising your hand is also a way to be interactive, so you can get that next to the participant window, and there is a click raise hand option with that. Again, if you want to pre-register and get those materials ahead of time, you can always email projectscope@usu.edu. And then the certificate of attendance. So please fill out that evaluation at the end of the session. That is how we then email the certificate of attendance. The survey will come out either today or tomorrow after this session, and then we do the certificates of attendance every month. So Canvas is where we store all of our recordings, the power presentations, case recommendations. So if you haven't accessed the Canvas page, you can email Kurt Phillips or Project Scope at USU, and we will get you set up for that Canvas page. There's a discussion board on Canvas. You can ask questions on Canvas, and other participants or other people can respond to those. Again, just another plug for that case study. It's a great way to share and learn information about a case that has kind of have just stumped, or you're just not quite sure what to do with it. REDCap is the survey tool. So that is where the surveys will come from. If you have not gotten that, at least by Friday, please check your spam and junk email folders. The surveys are the way that we keep these sessions free to everybody in the state. So it's really helpful for us to have those surveys sent in and sent back. And thank you to everybody who has done that over this network session. It's just been a great, just thank you. That's all I can say with that. I'm really excited to have Jamie Mecham here with us today. She is an associate clinical professor in the communicative disorders and deaf education here at Utah State. She is the director of the speech and language clinic. She just brings a wealth of experience and knowledge around language development, and it's going to share with us some amazing things. So thank you to Jamie for sharing with us. If you haven't followed us on Facebook or Instagram, take a minute to do that. We share resources, new information around the opioid epidemic. And then thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to stop sharing and turn the time over to Jamie.
Thank you, Janelle. I'm going to try and share. Let's see what I get. Oh.
So do your...
What are you seeing?
So I'm seeing your PowerPoint. So do play from the start.
Ah, are you seeing the right thing? You're not seeing my notes?
You swap it. There you go. Now we are seeing the right thing.
See, it's completely opposite from when Jared was in here helping me 5 minutes ago. It's all good.
Well, look at, we were able to
figured it out.
Figure it out.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me, Janelle. I'm happy to be here. And today we are going to talk about speech and language outcomes and how they are impacted by trauma. Our learning outcomes for today are to be able to identify impairments in speech, language, and social communication, understand language development, and learn effective interventions for children who have been exposed to trauma and have subsequent speech and language delays. Some of the content today may be a little difficult to hear, so if you're feeling triggered by the topic or the presentation, please take care of yourself. One thing that I've learned in the last few years is that we really cannot care for our clients or our patients if we don't take care of ourselves. So feel free to take care of yourself if needed. Trauma. Today we're talking about trauma, mostly with children, and realizing that traumatic experiences happen throughout the lifespan and impact different people differently. And a child can also trauma can happen to a child prenatally. So there's a large range and scope of when trauma can actually happen in your life and when it can impact you. But trauma is an overwhelming event that renders a child helpless. There are many different types of trauma, which is the ongoing impact of this event or experience. There's maltreatment, which is abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, or neglect. In 2019, there were 656,243 substantiated cases of maltreatment, which begs the question, how many unsubstantiated cases were there? I mean, substantiated cases are cases where law enforcement has been involved and the case has been substantiated. So I would dare guess there's probably close to that many more that have never been reported. State-sanctioned violence occurs or includes exploitation, impoverishment, police violence, slavery, human trafficking, consequences of migration, such as migrating under duress, ethnic and racial violence, disaster, gang violence. I think we'll start seeing more of these kiddos as we see influxes of immigrants from war-torn countries. Racism, and other forms of systematic exclusion, which include isolation or bullying, and adverse childhood experiences, which is any experience that can happen in a child's life that causes trauma. So it could be abuse, neglect, losing a parent, divorce or death, exposure to violence, mental illness by a caregiver, or drug or alcohol use by a parent or caregiver, or an incarcerated caregiver. Complex trauma is trauma within the caregiving or family system. If you think about a family in a home, they're supposed to be the safest source of stability and strength for a child growing up. And when chronic negative interactions occur, it causes trauma. And complex trauma can also occur prenatally when a mother is exposed to chronic stress or participates in activities or behaviors that can endanger themselves or the fetus. It will impact the child's development, and it's considered part of complex trauma. Adverse childhood experiences. 46% of children in the US have at least two of these adverse childhood experiences, and have at least one, excuse me, and 20% in the US have at least two. So we're talking over 50% of the population of children that we serve that have experienced adverse childhood experiences. So you will see these children in your practices, in your schools. It's inevitable that you will work with children who have experienced trauma. Our biological stress response is designed to save our lives from something threatening, and that's healthy. So stress can be healthy. The problem is that when the stress response is activated repeatedly, it becomes overactive and affects our brain development, our immune systems, and even how our DNA is read and transcribed. So high doses of stress hormones that are caused by trauma inhibit the brain's executive functioning and make it harder for kids to exercise impulse control and learn strategies and abilities that they need to be successful. Trauma causes stress. Toxic stress can permanently alter brain development and language development. There's been several studies that looked at MRIs of children who were affected by trauma. And on MRIs, it shows a shrinking of the hippocampus in the brain, which is important for memory and emotional regulation, and an increased size of the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center. So this makes children or adults who have been exposed to trauma hypervigilant. They're overly sensitive to threats or challenges. If they're exposed to high doses of adversity in childhood, the pleasure and reward centers of the brain are affected, and the amygdala begins to act as an accelerator. And the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for language use and acquisition, is told to break. So it stops functioning in order to protect. Our brain is built from the bottom up. So if the amygdala in the bottom portion of our brain is accelerating all the time, our prefrontal cortex, which we use for language and memory and attention, just breaks. It stops working. When a child is exposed to complex trauma or adverse childhood experiences, the centers in the brain that are responsible for language and social development are overridden by the stress response and are essentially shut down in order to protect the child. As we continue to talk about the effects of trauma on language, I'd like you to keep a family in mind. This is a family that we have recently seen in several clinics at Utah State University Sorensen Center for Clinical Excellence. At this point in the speech and language clinic, we have assessed all 6 of the siblings for speech and language delays. Mom disclosed years of family trauma, including abuse. The children have not had access to adequate health care. They don't attend public schools. They have no social networks outside of the home. In the past year, all 6 children have been diagnosed with PTSD. 3 were diagnosed with severe hearing impairments. 4 have been diagnosed with severe expressive, receptive, and social language delays, and 1 was diagnosed with a phonological impairment. All 6 children stutter when traumatic events are brought up as part of their PTSD. In the last year, this is the first time that these children have interacted with adults outside of their home, have seen a pediatrician or any kind of healthcare provider. This includes prenatal care or care following birth. So, you know, these kiddos are out there, and we need to learn how to understand the trauma that they are being exposed to, understand how we can help, and know the impacts of trauma. Prenatally, children who are exposed to trauma prenatally, such as drugs, alcohol, maternal abuse or neglect, or chronic stress for the mother, have a lower gestational birth weight. They have neurophysiological changes, neurobehavioral development, and delayed language development. So just kind of referring back to this case study family, by the time all 6 of those children were born, they had already been exposed to complex trauma. Signs of trauma in very young children: they may cry and scream more than typical. They feel under pressure or timid. They can develop new fears and anxieties. They have nightmares. They wet the bed, have poor eating habits, maybe weight loss, use baby talk. They recreate traumatic experiences during play, and they have stunted developmental growth. As children grow into elementary age, they may feel shame or guilt. They have fear and anxiety. They can be very clingy with adults that they feel like they can trust, have trouble sleeping, worry excessively, have difficulty concentration, startle easily. They either repeatedly want to talk about the traumatic experiences or they refuse to talk about it. And they have a decline in school performance, a loss of friends. They have memory difficulties, difficulty communicating what has happened to them. Language and pragmatic delays are not exclusive to trauma. We don't always know the reason a child may have a language delay, but it has become evident in the literature that children who experience trauma have more language concerns than their peers without trauma histories. There have been recently 3 systematic literature reviews that show through research that there are more language concerns than peers without trauma histories, and that they often have difficulty with vocabulary, language comprehension and production, and pragmatics, which is, you know, your ability to socially communicate, have theory of mind, be able to take others' perspectives, and explanatory discourse, or being able to tell your story, explain the things that have happened to you. In order to identify impairments in speech and language, we have to understand in children in preschool and up to 3 populations that children who have experienced trauma will have limited vocabulary, unpredictable behaviors, inability to follow directions, and difficulty just making friends or connecting with others. They're often very frustrated, and the only way that they know how to deal with that is to lash out to those that are in their environment. Identifying impairments as children grow, they'll often have a decreased expressive vocabulary, meaning that they just don't use as much language as their peers. They have a low mean length of utterance, or they use shorter sentences. They have a low vocabulary for naming objects. They haven't been exposed to the world around them enough to understand and know the vocabulary. They have decreased receptive vocabulary, meaning auditory comprehension, understanding what's been said to them, and following directions. One of the largest impacts in language is limited informativeness and cohesion in their narratives. So it makes them very hard. It makes it difficult for them to express what's happened and make it believable, because they don't have the the cohesiveness in their language to tell a reliable story. They lack social skills, social competence, social cognition. They're just not learning about the world around them. And so they're not able to communicate that to others in their environments. Children with trauma histories are often misdiagnosed. Trauma responses can look like a lot of other disorders, particularly if you don't ask the right questions and get to know the family. Trauma also often looks like ADHD or autism, sometimes oppositional defiant disorder or sensory integration or a learning disability. The case history family, when they initially came to our clinic, mom was convinced that all of her children had ADHD and that they all had autism because of some of the behaviors that they would exhibit in response to trauma. And, she also just Googled some of their responses to trauma and some of the behavioral things they were doing. And of course, a lot of those things come up looking like ADHD or autism. So it's important to have, really frank conversations with caregivers and family members to understand what the children have been through so that they don't get misdiagnosed. A lot of the disorders that they get misdiagnosed with are things that really can be treated but cannot be cured. But trauma is not one of those things. Trauma is something that is in your history. It's there, but you can recover from trauma, and with the right help and therapies and consistent treatments and consistent people in your life, you can recover. All told, trauma manifests as deprivation and maltreatment associated with neurological changes, particularly in areas of the brain associated with cognitive and language development and emotional understanding and regulation. In identifying impairments, it's important to understand ongoing deficits in recognizing emotion and linked emotion to contextual situations. So children who have had trauma histories and trauma backgrounds have deficits in recognizing emotion. They're not accurate in identifying particularly positive emotions. They are viewing the world through a very negative lens. So they don't really recognize sadness in others, but they do recognize anger. And they perceive anger in many situations, even ambiguous situations that are not portraying anger. They have fewer and less detailed episodic memory as early as the late preschool years. So they view everything through a very distorted and very negative lens and have a hard time remembering anything that's not traumatic. So what can we do? The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration defines trauma-informed practice as practices that are based on the knowledge and understanding of trauma and its far-reaching implications. So the first thing that we need to understand and realize is that the widespread impact of trauma. Trauma is everywhere. I think that we can all probably think of a traumatic experience that's happened in our own life that we may or may not have been able to put behind us. We need to recognize the signs and symptoms and respond by integrating our knowledge of trauma into practice. We also need to help our patients and clients resist re-traumatization. So in learning trauma-informed practice, the very first thing that we need to do for our clients or our patients is provide safety. They need to feel safe. They need to know that they can trust us. And one of the ways that they learn that is through transparency. We need to be transparent with our actions. We need to let them know and explain to them the things that we are doing and why we are doing it. We need to provide peer support. These kids often aren't given peer opportunities, interactions. So we need to provide those. Collaboration and mutuality is essential. There will be many people involved in these children's lives, and it's important to collaborate with all of them, all the caregivers, all the teachers, the doctors, the different therapies. Everyone needs to work together and treat the family as a whole unit instead of just pulling out the one child maybe that you're working with. One thing that's very important for people who have experienced trauma is to be given empowerment. They're often in their lives have been given no empowerment. They haven't had a voice or been able to make a choice. They have been acted upon. So it's important for us in therapy and in practice to provide them with the empowerment that they have a voice and they have a choice. And then it's also important to understand that there are many cultural, historical, and gender issues that impact how we treat clients. So part of learning the framework of trauma is changing the question and the framework in our mind from what's wrong with this child to what happened to this child. And I think if we approach a child from a lens of what happened and how can we be part of a solution versus what's wrong, then we start seeing the impact of our actions and we can start making a difference. Trauma-informed practice is a team process. You'll complete evaluations and intervention like you would with any child, with an added layer of holistic understanding that you can't just treat the child. Trauma happens in a family dynamic. So it's a team process. We want to use assessments that identify strengths and interventions that focus on strengths. We want to learn about the child and the family and explore the macro level of processes that are affecting the child. When we are assessing and forming intervention plans for children in traumatic environments, it's really important that we learn and know all we can about the child and the family and understand the situation so that we don't perpetuate more trauma or increase the child's trauma through the things that we're focusing on. Trauma-informed action, according to SAMHSA, is creating psychological and physical safety. The child doesn't feel safe, they're not going to trust you. So we have to create psychological and physical safety. We can do that by being consistent and transparent, having clear boundaries, being aware of the possible triggers that the child might experience, and listening to the child's voice and providing them with choices. Trauma-informed assessment will use standardized assessments, criterion referenced assessments, interviews, and observations. It's important to get to know the client, the family, their caregivers, interview caregivers within the home, interview preschool teachers, interview grandma, anyone who's interacting with this child so that you understand the way they behave in all of their environments. That way you can help treat them in holistically in all of their environments. Trauma-informed intervention. Once you've assessed the child and you know what the deficits or impairments are, we want to look at providing interventions that are safe, interventions that minimize overwhelm. One of the things that children with trauma backgrounds are easily succumb easily to is overwhelm, because they've spent so much of their life with their amygdala being in charge and their prefrontal cortex shut down. When anything gets overwhelming, that response takes over. So we have to really minimize and simplify the things that we're doing and the interventions that we're taking so that we minimize overwhelm and we keep the prefrontal cortex part of their brain working. It's important for us as providers to change our mind about behaviors and look at the behaviors as what's this child trying to communicate. They're not trying to be bad kids. They're not, they have no control. They're trying to communicate something to us, and we need to try and figure out what that is. Changing our focus to, what's happened to this child that would cause them to behave the way they are, and what are they trying to communicate from that behavior. We need to recognize the trauma behaviors, establish clear boundaries, and provide choices rather than limitations. Make sure that our interventions are strengths-based and address their triggers, and that we're constantly supporting resiliency and addressing skills that will support self-sufficiency. Some ways that we can model informed intervention or teach informed intervention is to model. We need to model for parents how to provide a language-rich environment. Kids who come from trauma backgrounds have parents who are traumatized. It doesn't come naturally for them to engage with the child the way that they need to be in order to provide a language-rich environment. So we need to teach them to put their phone down, to engage and interact, to get down on the floor, to read predictable books and use wait time. We need to teach and model for them how to talk to their children and play with their children, so we can teach them language stimulation techniques such as self-talk, talking about what you're doing. Look, mommy's making breakfast. We're going to have pancakes. Parallel talk, talking about what the child is doing. Oh, Johnny's pushing the truck. Expansions. If your child says dog, you expand it by saying it's a big dog or it's a black dog. So constantly modeling and teaching our kids how to talk. For most of us, that comes naturally, but if you have been exposed to trauma and you're in survival mode, you're not thinking about getting down on the floor and playing with your child and giving them the skills that they need. I've had many parents tell me, I don't talk to my kids until they can talk back. It doesn't work like that. You have to start at birth. They're never too young to be talked to be read to. They learn by example. And so we have to teach their caregivers how to be that example. In terms of our case study, the key to assessing and treating this family has been open communication, empathy, and transdisciplinary care. You cannot treat clients who've been exposed to trauma in a silo. For this family, it's taken social workers, audiologists, vocational counseling, speech-language pathology, and we've all worked together to treat the entire family using a holistic approach. Collaborating with each other, focusing on the family's strengths and the dynamics in all sessions, and providing training to other disciplines that are working with the child. Train them in the things that you do and the things that you know, so that you're all working toward the same goals. One of the other important things that we can do to protect and help children who've been exposed to trauma is to be an advocate. Help colleagues change the language and the mindset about behaviors. Teach your colleagues about the concept of not what's wrong with this child, but what's happened to this child and what are they trying to communicate with the behaviors that they're presenting. Learn about the effects of trauma in all areas of a person's life and body. I treat speech and language disorders, but that's not the only thing that's been affected by trauma for these kids. So it's important to understand what their home life looks like, what it looks like for them at school, the people that they're interacting with, and be able to try and make the language treatment comprehensible in all of those aspects of their life. Recognizing when there's a need for a trauma assessment, knowing the signs of trauma and providing the appropriate assessments, and always remembering that children and adults can heal from trauma, given the right resources and the right people to support them, they can heal and lead productive lives. Does anyone have any questions, comments?
So everybody, if you want to just unmute yourself, we'll take a few minutes to answer those questions. You can put them in the chat. And one of the things that, Jamie, I wanted to ask about is, how does that impulse control impact language? That was one question I had.
Well, I think anytime we think of impulse control and, you know, the amygdala taking over your brain, the sections of your brain that you use for language have been shut down. So your impulses take over in terms of, you know, you're mad, and instead of being able to say, I'm mad or I need help, it comes out as an adverse negative behavior, screaming or hitting, throwing a tantrum, because the language centers in your brain are impacted. They've been turned off. There's not an ability to have the attention or the memory to use the language that you've stored there, because the impulse to just act out has taken over due to the amygdala. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And
Yeah.
that was helpful. Thank you so much.
So those impulses just kind of shut down your brain's ability to formulate and learn new language and store it into memory.
I have a quick question. We're talking about all these different types of trauma that exist from, I mean, you mentioned prenatally, but also outside trauma. And I know that so I have a sister who is pregnant, and she found out her daughter had DiGeorge syndrome. And I know that takes a completely different path, but wouldn't that trauma also play a part in this kind of information? I mean, because her pregnancy was really difficult. And then she had so many different surgeries as a child, you know, as a little baby. So even if she didn't have DiGeorge, wouldn't that trauma also play a part into what you're talking about today?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's so many different kinds of trauma, like you said, and like, you know, in your sister's case, that trauma isn't something that she had any control over. And I'm sure, you know, did the very best she could to protect herself and her baby, but
right. Just
incidentally, there is trauma, and it's going to impact development. Often kids who are born with different, you know, syndromes or disorders and go through those things both prenatally and as infants have delayed speech and language, because your brain reacts the same. Your brain doesn't really know is this trauma coming because, you know, mom and dad are fighting and screaming, or is this trauma coming from another source? Your brain, especially a child's brain, isn't able to kind of figure that out. It's just the response and the hormones and the stress hormones that impact the brain development can cause disorders and language and speech delays, just due to that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
You know, and kind of just touching on that, I think the important thing to know and recognize, and when you have patients or clients in that situation who understand and know that this has been a traumatic and a hard pregnancy or a birth or a delivery, or, you know, my child has undergone some really stressful things as an infant, you know, those families are looking for help and resources. So providing them early on is important. You know, we're not always that lucky that we have parents or caregivers and family members who understand and are looking for the help. So sometimes we find them as we see them in our practices, or we're referred. So taking advantage of the families that come to you knowing that there's been a traumatic history and giving them the resources that they need is really important.
I'm going to open it up again to any other additional questions.
Sorry, I'm trying to stop my screen sharing.
You're good. Bailey, are you seeing any in chat? I'm not.
No, I'm not.
Okay. All right. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us. What a great bit of information. I think it's always helpful to remember that development builds upon each other, and some of that really starts in early, and making sure that we're addressing some of that. So what a great reminder of the signs of trauma and how that can impact our language, which I don't always think that we put those two together side by side all the time. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. And if anybody has questions or anything, down the road, or you think of something, please don't hesitate to email me. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can, or find the right people to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are now going to go on to our case presentation, and I am the one who is presenting this today. I'm going to share my screen. And let me just give you all a little bit of background. So this was a family that during early intervention I had consulted with. They've been with several different families in foster care. I was never a direct provider, so my knowledge may be limited, but the current foster family, as well as the preschool teacher, had contacted me just recently. And so I said, if you are okay, I would love to share this with a group of extremely knowledgeable professionals. So I am hoping that you guys will be able to give me some information and feedback that I can take back to this group. So I'm really excited about it. So just a little bit about this little kiddo is that the medical background is they were exposed to substance in utero, and the substances included fentanyl, heroin, meth, Xanax, and Adderall. The father also used substance and overdosed shortly after the child was born. So talk about just what Jamie was mentioning, all that trauma. There's been a lot of trauma within this family dynamic. And then also that the child spent 2 weeks in NICU without any treatment. And then after 2 weeks, methadone was given. So currently the child is 3 years old. They were enrolled in early intervention. Like I said, they saw a developmental specialist, an occupational therapist. I was never a direct provider during early intervention. Just had some consultation with that. And then they are now currently in special education for 4 days a week, with also some speech and language services. This child has had multiple foster placements. I think in early intervention, they actually had 4 different foster placements. And now at the start of the school year, so we're almost to the end of it, this child has been in 1 current foster placement. The mom is currently incarcerated, but when she was not incarcerated, she had sporadic visits with the child. So the primary areas of concern for everybody, of course, have been the speech and language, because this child does have expressive language delays. Both the teacher and the foster family are reporting that he only has about 20 words. Receptive language he can locate 10 common objects and will follow some simple directions with prompts. The teacher's biggest concern is this safety and compliance. The child throws objects, screams, and hits. So when Jamie was talking about that, it really reminded me of that impulse control with it. He bolts out of the classroom when upset. So they would really love to have him participate in circle time with peers, follow some group directions, increase that vocabulary, and then the foster family would just like some resources for supporting child development. The barriers in reaching some of those goals are just the aggression and bolting away from small group activities and classrooms. So I asked, like, what were some of the things that they've currently been using? And they are using some specific praise and reducing that verbal attention about misbehavior. They do a token reward in the small groups. And then foster parents are working on getting enrolled into the PCIT training. And that's an acronym, so let me say that out loud. It's Parent-Child Intervention Training that goes through with DCFS, the Division of Family and Child Services. They also have tried or are just recently tried using the I Need a Break card with him. For language, they've been simplifying their language, been working on some modeling, choice boards, and picture exchange. So the questions that they called and to ask me for some ideas and resources about were, what are some other classroom management ideas to help with the bolting and throwing? And then how to increase his on-task attention in small group activities. And are there resources that the foster family should seek out? And if so, what would those be? So, questions or thoughts about this child, this situation? Pat.
So is this little person going to be staying in the same foster home?
That is the ultimate goal. So that's where this foster family would really like to, because he's been bumped around quite a bit. And so they are really enjoying this placement, but they are also feeling kind of out of their realm. But that is the ultimate goal. So any resources to help support that is kind of what they're asking for too.
So I don't know where this kiddo is, and I know that's a privacy thing, so don't answer that. But if they are around the Salt Lake Davis County area, there is a place called Touchstone Therapy that focuses on foster care and trauma stuff if they are interested in that. And they do amazing.
That's fantastic. And just also to let you all know, we're going to stay in this large group because instead of doing breakouts. So feel free to put information in the chat. Just let's talk about it and see what other ideas generate.
There was a question in the chat from Kathy.
Okay, go ahead and read it. I can't see my chat since I'm sharing the screen. So
it just says, she said, is the child receiving any type of therapy, as in play therapy or psychological help?
So currently, the limited knowledge that I know, the answer is no. They are just doing the special education. And like I said, the family is trying to get enrolled in that PCIT training. Speaking of that, what type of services or therapy would you recommend with that? Was it Kathy?
Yeah. Kathy Kearney, I think is how you say your last name.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I'm not really sure, but it looks like if this child is already 3 and no one has addressed this, it sounds to me like someone needs to evaluate this child psychologically as well and see if he could or she could benefit from some type of therapy, and include the foster families so that they would understand how to best interact with this child.
Okay, so maybe would that be just recommending the family go to a child psychologist? Do you have a specific one that you would recommend, or?
Someone that's familiar with child behavior and foster children who've experienced trauma. But no particular agency that I'm aware of.
Okay. Does anybody else on the call have a preferred office or clinic that they referred those to? You know, that's one of the things that I think this family is really looking for, is like a specific one that we have some good success with.
Where's the family located?
Somewhere in Utah.
Okay. Well, I know there's a place in Pleasant Grove in Utah County. I think it's called the Greenhouse Center.
Okay.
One of their focus, well, one of their, I don't know, one of the things they use as an incentive is the fact that they were both those who started the group were both in the foster system as foster parents. And so they often they promote having families who have children who have been adopted or in the foster care system, and they work with them. I don't know if it includes all the different areas, but I know that they do behavioral therapy, and I know that they do. I'm pretty sure they do the psychological stuff. But anyway, I'm actually consider taking my son there, which is one of the reasons I bring him up, because I've heard only good reviews from him. But that's a possibility, I guess.
Yeah, and I know that's pretty vague when I say somewhere in Utah, but one of the things when I was saying I was going to share this case is that we were from all over, and other people might have different resources from their area versus where this family is at. And they have said that they are more than willing to travel and go wherever is needed. So I don't want it to limit what we're going to share with that. So the more specific, and I think that lots of times you guys know people to work with, and that's how you build that trust. Is Adrian really liked that. I can't even remember. Bailey's taking notes for me, so I can't remember that place that Adrienne you just shared, but you have a good rapport with them, and so you know what amazing things they do.
Some people have put in the chat, Nicole recommended Northeastern Counseling that helps with troubled children. And then also there's been a couple people that have said the Children's Center.
Great.
So those, and then there's been some more questions. Let me go up. Nicole said, I don't know if they have IEPs or a 501 plan in place with his preschool, but have them make sure that's happening, and then to have the child start going to counseling if they're not already.
So the child does have that IEP. They are in this special education part C, no, part B. You would think I would know with being in early intervention, but they're always backwards. So the part B, preschool, special education, 4 days a week and getting speech and language too. So would there be something that you specifically would suggest having on their IEP? I don't know who wrote that comment, Bailey.
It was Nicole Whitehead.
So Nicole, is there something specific that we should make sure are coming up on that IEP?
She said just all of his behavioral issues.
Anybody have any ideas that or techniques or tips or anything to help with the classroom management with the bolting and throwing, things that you guys find successful? Pat, I can see you.
I'm not a very good behavioral specialist. You don't want to send me any of your behavior kids. I just go, oh my gosh. No. So my question was more training of the staff that have everything to do with him, like have things that interact with him. Is there across the board an understanding of why he is the way he is, and going back to what happened to him versus what's wrong with him? I mean, you can take one provider and they can mess it up.
Yeah, that's a good point. So making sure everybody on who interacts and is on this team kind of understands that background. To be honest, like I said, I'm not 100% sure. I'll make that recommendation and suggestion to them.
There's been some comments in the chat about, I could read a bunch of them, about like group time, like when he's with people, and then the bolting thing. So Holly said, consider what needs the throwing is meeting and set boundaries on where throwing is appropriate and where it's not.
Holly, would you like to provide any more? It's always harder in this big group, and that's why we tend to do those breakout sessions. But Holly, any other specifics on that?
It's hard to say because like I've worked with children that have not necessarily done the throwing, but they seem to need to do more like large motor activities, and like the way that they're expressing that is through maybe shoving other children or just like moving around a lot, but helping that child say like, okay, like throwing is okay, but we can throw balls, but we can't throw toys, and if we throw balls we need to be outside or in like this specific area, things like that, where he can learn that like, okay, I have this way to get my energy out like I want to, but there's some limits to like what I can and can't do and things like that. And I know it's a little more difficult as he's limited in his verbal like understanding and things like that. But that's things that we've like practiced in my previous position where I worked with kids with disabilities and behaviors and things like that.
Well, that's a great idea. Just a follow up, Polly, when you did that, did you ever, and you had a low language, do you think that maybe working on with some visual cues on that would be helpful? Have you ever tried that?
Definitely, yeah. And I also mentioned up above, there's this curriculum by Dr. Becky Bailey called Conscious Discipline, and it has like a lot of good resources with children with disabilities and behaviors that on how to do a lot of like visual schedules and a lot of visual representation. So she has these cards where it's like, okay, this is how like lining up looks like, and this is what lining up doesn't look like. And or when you're at the table, like we clean up our spot. So this is a clean table, this is a dirty table. So definitely like anything visual is a really great way to communicate that to our nonverbal students.
Well, that's a great recommendation. Has anybody else tried that curriculum? I've never heard of that before.
I'm actually enrolled in Conscious Discipline through my son's school, and they did it for when from 0 to 3 and now 3 to 5, I believe it is. There's 2 separate courses for each age group, and I've learned so much from it. I know that I think you have to pay for it, but I think they pay for it and then give me like a link and I sign in and do it. But I have like a workbook and stuff. I could find out from her how I can refer it to somebody else.
Oh, that's awesome. And you found as a parent that to be pretty helpful in that. So
Absolutely.
a parent and a classroom teacher, what a great resource.
Yeah, it's really great. It's a parent first curriculum, then like child second. So it really helps like the parent kind of ground themselves and understand like what's going on within themselves when they're trying to discipline a child. Like maybe they're triggered by something, but then that teaches them to take a step back and be like, okay, what's going on for that child and how can I teach them? I also gave some other suggestions of, let's see, adjusting the expectations for small group time, like maybe sitting still for extended period of time is too hard for that child. So alternative seating like a wobble chair or a basket with a blanket in it, and then give them fidget toys while they're at group. And on also using first then charts where they sit for 5 minutes, use a visual timer, and then they get a toy to play with or do an alternative activity. And then you gradually work to increase that time that they're sitting at group.
Oh, that's awesome. And you gave just some recommendations right there that Angela, the OT from DDI, I know some of those were sensory things. Would you have any other suggestions? Sorry, I'm not opposed to calling somebody specifically out.
No worries. Yeah, not that they're at the top of my head right now. I think that the things that have been covered are really great places to start, and see how this child responds to it.
Okay, I might have just negatively reinforced that you're the only one that I could see that you were an OT. Nobody's ever going to put their discipline on now that I called them out. But then Jennifer, I also just saw your hand up. So
I just have a perspective from a foster parent perspective. Those foster parents, if they are at their wit's end and need some extra respite, they can ask DCFS for extra respite. The downside of that is it sounds like this little kiddo has been missing consistency, and that's one of our huge problems here. So my suggestion is that they pick one issue, one thing that's really a problem to work on, and meet with the school, the parents. So if this child, I don't know if they're having visits or not with parents, but you can work on something and be so consistent, and then they go visit or they go to whatever, and you start back when they come back after a visit or whatever. But if they could pick something to work on with both the school teachers and the foster family together and just be so consistent in that, because that's something that he's just really missed out on. And it's just amazing to me with my kiddos that come just so dysregulated, how much that consistency is just that routine and consistency will help. So just to pick something and make sure they're all on the same page is really important.
okay, yeah, that's a great idea. The mom is currently incarcerated, so they are not having family.
Not at all. Sometimes grandmas can have visits or, dads or whoever. So I just wondered if.
No, currently no, but that's a great suggestion too. I love that. Consistency is always helpful. Even I just think, as you said that, I'm like, oh yeah, it's always helpful if me and my husband are on the same page with our kids, huh? Anybody else have any ideas or thoughts that would help us as a group? Because I know that this is not the only child that probably has these concerns around bolting and throwing or increasing that attention. So, and you guys have given great ones.
A lot of people in the chat have said for bolting to use child locks on the doors.
Okay.
Like at his preschool and at home.
Anybody else? I don't know. Did whoever wrote that want to come off and talk a little bit about that? explain what that means?
There's Leticia. I'm sorry if I said your name wrong. You had mentioned bolting the lock or having a child lock or whatever it's called. Do you mind talking about that more?
Was it Leticia Knight? We
Yes.
probably just both butchered that name. I apologize. Come off mute and tell us really how to say your name.
Yeah.
Nope, I know being put on the spot is always so hard. But with those bolts, if anybody else has ever, or those locks, in a classroom setting, would the teacher need to do anything for approval for that? Do you guys know?
So that my son's classroom has them. I don't know if they have
So
to
what
get
do
'em
they
approved.
look like? I can imagine the teacher going, what does that look like? And what does that mean?
It's just like a white plastic thing that goes over the doorknob. And then
Oh.
it's got holes on the sides that you have to stick your fingers in and squeeze the doorknob. It's really
So
fun
just
to
like
watch
what
people try
families
and
would
figure.
use that for parent
Yeah.
lock?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I'm understanding it to be.
See, and I was thinking like this big chain lock that like we're like keeping them in there. So see, good explanation. Pat, I saw you laugh at me when I said that.
There's some other handles, like if it's a handle rather than a doorknob, they do have other child locks that kind of you have to it's kind of behind the handle and you have to like pull down. It's complicated, but they do have multiple styles depending on the door that is in the classroom.
Okay.
I worked at Big River Head Start, and we were able to get child locks on those doors, and they had a similar handle situation rather than the doorknob.
So Debbie, I know, look, you have your name, your specialty next to your name too. So do you have any suggestions to that if you had a family that was struggling with on-task attention that you would have recommended?
Are you referring to me?
Yep, Debbie Richer, yep.
Okay. I have both been a special education classroom teacher before and currently work in early intervention. And my guess is that in the special education setting, they might have to like write into the IEP that they're going to put doorknob covers on the doors or special locks on there. Sorry, my phone is ringing all of a sudden. Sorry.
You're good.
It'll stop in a second, I hope. Let's see. Anyway, so that's it. I would just talk to the administrators at the school and just make sure that, you know, if they need special permission to have the doorknob covers or locks on there, that they do that. Other than that, I don't know. I was reading in the chat like some I suggested some social stories, maybe at home or at school. But I also totally agree with the people that have recommended like play therapy and stuff for him, because I think we've got to get to the root of the problem, what's really going on with him, in order to help his behavior change eventually. So, but those are some ideas. You know, just supporting him, some fidget toys. I think everybody that's contributed in the chat has had really great ideas. There've been quite a few that I've seen pop up in there. Somebody else, you know, suggested maybe a ball to sit on or some fidget toys, or you know, trying to just help him understand, you know, that, you know, and give him a replacement behavior. I mean, there's got to be, I'm guessing his fight or flight is kicking in because he's uncomfortable, and we need to help him get to the root cause of what's causing that response and how can we, you know, help him. I guess. So those are some thoughts that I have.
God, you
That-
guys see, I love this. I love all the, and it sounds like in the chat, there's even way more suggestions with it.
There's a lot of stuff in there. So
Um,
honestly, yeah. I think a lot of people contributed and there's great ideas in there. So, and that
Awesome.
stuff gets transcribed and sent.
Yeah.
Does it get like, remind me, is it transcribed so everybody can see it or just the people that wanted the case study done?
Nope. So the case recommendations are always on our Canvas page. If you
Okay.
do a case presentation, the recommendations do get emailed directly to you, but all the other participants can find those recommendations because you guys are giving amazing recommendations that you could go back and pull those and look at them. And because like I said, I mean, you know, we all have cases that we are stumped with, and the more tools that we have in our, in our tool bag, that the better providers we are. So that's the best thing about case studies is that you hear an idea that you're like, oh my gosh, that's going to work for this one family that I work with that has nothing to do with it. So I love it. Anybody else have any ideas or things that would be helpful for me to take back to this team?
I have a thought. One of the things that when we were fostering our kids and we were going through all the different classes, one of the things they talked about was doing like a time in instead of like a time out. And it was kind of, as we went to an occupational therapist at the same time, they kind of connected the same idea, but with the discipline, setting a specific chair or a specific bench where if they had thrown something, for example, that they would go and sit on this bench. And then you would be there obviously with them and help them with the calming down techniques. You know, one of the things they talked about is just having them hold up your hand and then breathing in and out as they trace their fingers up and down to help them calm down. Just simple things that they can do with their own bodies that will help them calm down instead of always having to have something with them, so that they have both of those techniques. But then also, as soon as they're able to calm down, just talking to them, you know, about their emotions. What happened to make you feel so angry? Or, you know, how can we prevent this? Or simple things like that. And you'd have to obviously come up with questions that would be age appropriate. And I think that would work really well at home. I don't know how you would do that in a school setting though, because unless they have like an aide in the classroom at all times who could do that, I don't know how that would work at school. But I think for our son, that was really helpful in helping him self-regulate at home, at least.
That's a great one. And then Bailey, I saw you come off mute.
Yes, there's just another suggestion in the chat. Clarice asked, does the child have special interest? If so, you may be able to try incorporating the interest into the small group activities to increase on-task behavior.
Oh, that's a great idea too, for sure, with that.
Then there's a lot more. Like Nicole suggested like having a cool down spot, kind of to go with what Tiffany was saying, but like a cool down spot in the class for when he gets overwhelmed. That way he has a safe place to go and sit where no kids or anyone can bother him and he can calm down there. And she also suggested making sure he's in a quieter classroom as well, because the louder, noisier ones may be too much for him and be a part of the bull team. And Holly added some more about the conscious disciplines, or that curriculum. She said it teaches I love you rituals that build connection and really builds on that consistency that someone had mentioned earlier. And then she also said that it has a lot of free resources too, like webinars and podcasts. And so you can create a free account and be able to access those resources.
Okay.
So the family can do that.
Oh, great. Those great ones. I was just wondering if anybody on this call has been taking those pyramid models that have been offered through the state to early intervention, and have tried or attended one where they're talking about, oh, the word just left me, but it's looking at, oh my gosh, I can't even think of it, but like their like personality. So how they respond to things. And has anybody taken any of those pyramid model trainings? Know what I'm talking about? Okay. Well, I was also wondering so if anybody doesn't know about those pyramid training modules, they are offered through the state. Baby Watch is helping to support those. And right now they're free. They do have an infant toddler one. And like I said, if I could remember what like the session was about, but it was really talking about, you know, trying to identify, just like what you guys are saying, identifying their response to things, calm versus what your response to things are, and how to improve your classroom management through that. So that's another idea. Anything else that you guys have in the last 2 minutes before we wrap things up? I'm excited to read through all of the comments in the chat. And then, like I said, thank you again. What a great bit of information you guys have just shared with all of us, and specifically me, to take back to this group. Okay, well, our next session is going to be on May. You guys, can you believe that May is in a week? So it will be May 11th, and we will be talking about monitoring child development as well as implicit bias. So please join us, and then all the survey will be sent out either today or tomorrow, and please take a minute to complete that survey. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully it's not raining where you're at.